Welcome to the Holistic Career Change Podcast. Spoiler alert, we don't discuss conventional, linear, boring career change here. This is the place where we talk about finding an aligned career path that feels like an extension of who you are, where you get paid for being yourself. Forget personality quizzes, soul-crushing scrolling on job sites, and breaking your brain trying to find your why. Join me and many other career changers who've changed their career holistically by first defining who they are at their core and then using this blueprint to design a fulfilling career or business. We use the mind-body-soul approach, and we take into consideration the complexity and multidimensionality of all that you are and want to represent in the world. This is where purpose-led careers are born and built. I'm your host, Vilma Oseita. Let's go. Hello, friends. How have you been? I hope you're so well. I hope you're dreaming. And then I really hope that you're turning these aligned dreams into your new reality. Today I have a bit of a different episode for you, a conversation with my dear friend Elizé, who's a speaking confidence and visibility coach. Elizé and I, by the way, have never met in person. She's my online friend, but she has become a dear friend, and I feel like our journeys in many ways are aligned. And she and I would often have these amazing, exploratory, revealing, private conversations about how I noticed that many of my clients, especially those who transition into owning their own businesses, starting their businesses, at the beginning stages, really struggle with showing up authentically, standing tall and proud in this new identity that they're creating for themselves and being comfortable with being seen. Not only that, but I also share how myself for the longest time, and to some extent still do, struggle with showing up on camera or sharing video content. But that has not stopped me from launching and becoming relatively successful in my coaching practice. And obviously, successful, right, is a relative term. What success for me may not be success for you, and vice versa. I think we often, as a collective, we observe this online space and create so many assumptions around who we should be, how we should show up, what we should look like, how we should speak if we want to be successful. And I see, say, a lot of maybe more introverted, sensitive people feeling like they need to become extroverted, loud, funny, charismatic individuals in order to build a successful business. And it could not be further from the truth. A lot of it is fake news, you guys, because all you need to be successful, all you need to worry and focus on is how you can give yourself permission, how you can find courage and strength to unapologetically show up as you. So in this conversation you're about to listen to, I will firstly pretty candidly, and it was a little emotional because I think like I was even processing this as I was sharing how uncomfortable to this day I feel on camera. And what's funny, other people can't always tell that I'm uncomfortable because they do come across as perhaps confident or relaxed and flowy in my conversations, but we never know what fight someone is fighting inside of them. Elizé and I will also share how the environments that we grew up with essentially shaped our relationship with authenticity and authentic self-expression, which I really believe is going to be very useful to hear for some of you because it may spark some aha moments for you too, because we had very different experiences growing up, myself and Elizé, and because of these different experiences, our relationship with showing up, say, on video or speaking our truth is very different as well. We also will talk about the energetics of visibility, and we will even touch upon ancestral healing is something that her and I are now really into, and how connecting with our ancestors has been supporting us in reclaiming our voice and feeling, accessing that power that your ancestors can give you. We'll also discuss reframes we have for social media and online space in general, and how it actually can become a healing space for us individually and collectively. And it's all about how you choose to see it and perceive it, how it can become your new family, which again is something many conscious, sensitive souls like perhaps yourself may struggle with, because many of us have been seeing online space as this like overcrowded nervous system dysregulation hellhole. But it can become your healer. So again, I'm really sorry. I'm in my bad mic era. This is the last episode that I had pre-recorded where I did not have my mic yet. But again, I have told myself that I'm not going to let this stop me, because I really think this conversation is going to be very useful for many of you. And I hope it's equal amounts healing and fun for you. Enjoy.
So you've been able to have a seemingly successful business, right? Everyone's definition of success is different, but like you've been able to have programs, run your business, and continuously get more leads, and without putting yourself that much visibly on social. And so I'd love to know just like how you've been able to do that, and what are things that you've kind of learned on your journey of like becoming more active on social, and how you've been able to avoid being seen, but still being able to like get the success that you have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Even this, right? This conversation as we're talking now, you asked me like, are you okay with being on camera? And I said, I'm not loving it. It doesn't feel quite comfortable for me. And I feel like that's a fear that I had for as long as I remember myself. I am that person, when we would travel with our friends, when we would have parties, it would be like when people are about to take a picture, if I can get away from it, I will. So there are a bunch of pictures, even from like years back, where like you see me walking away from a shot.
Like, here we go. Shots of you in like motion.
Yes, right. And me like covering my face with a glass or with a book, or like turning around. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous. I'd be like, if I can't use my good sides, I'm not taking a picture, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, to that ridiculous extent, because for me, being seen and not being able to control what I look like felt really vulnerable, really scary. And I would always like to have as much control as I can. So therefore, for me, say even having a picture, so you will see like I will post some pictures, because picture to me feels like I can choose the angle, I can choose the colors, I can choose the outfit. There's a lot of control, so it feels safer. Video does not feel safe for me, because remember, I think you even coached me on that at some point, where I'm like, talking face in motion feels very out of control for me. And it's the wildest, weirdest fear that I have of my face talking and other people seeing my face talk. So I'm okay with my clients seeing me on camera, because obviously I only work remotely. I don't have in-person clients. I'm okay with my group seeing me, but it's sort of still very controlled, select few individuals who are quote unquote allowed to see me, right? And so when I started the business, I would see a lot of other individuals or coaches really putting themselves out there. It would be like lives, it would be stories, it would be videos, then it was reels. And I would look at that and I would feel really intimidated, because I was like, for me to produce like 30-second reel will probably take half a day, because it would be like retakes on retakes on retakes. And even then I'll probably hate it. Right. So then I was like, okay, so if I really struggle with being seen, and there's a fear of being judged for my looks, for, I don't know, mostly my looks, I think. Then I was like, what else have I got? I've got written words and I like writing. So I will go with written word. I will start with written word and I'll just write posts. And this is how I started doing it. I started writing posts. People started resonating with them. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to take it the next level. I can record a podcast. That was also very, very scary for me. I remember my first podcast, actually, which is not really featured now, was with another fellow coach, where we would just kind of talk about life and different themes and different topics. And I remember it would be like a 40-minute conversation, and I would spend 2 days editing myself. Not even her, myself. I would edit like every little thing that felt imperfect, that felt not perfect, because I was like, there's no way I can allow my unedited raw version to be heard by the world. that felt like there's no way. I don't mind spending hours and hours and days on this like 40-minute recording. And then I launched my own podcast, and I share it even on my podcast. The very first episode that I re-recorded it 8 times. I re-recorded it 8 times. It took me the whole day. I cried in between takes, like literally like, and I'm an ugly crier, like ugly cry, snot all over. And I remember the only reason why I, in the end, hit publish is because I really wanted the podcast to be launched on January 1st, 2020 or 2021. I don't remember. And I was like, I don't care. And literally it was like this me forcing myself to hit publish just because I had promised myself to release the podcast. And when you listen back to the first episode, you can literally hear me like snotting, like I'm tired. I'm just like, I just want to get my words out. So I think ever since I remember myself, just like that fear of being seen has always been a big theme, but it didn't let me stop that. It didn't let that stop me. And I think that's one of the messages that I have for a lot of budding entrepreneurs, or people who feel like they need to be seen in order to put the work out there, that like you are allowed to decide how you will do that and how much you will allow other people to see you. Also knowing that your capacity to be seen will grow with time as well.
Yeah. I feel you on that, because when you were describing all of it, first, like I felt just like my body understand, like, I don't know, I felt all this empathy with you, because I also had experienced similar things when I first started creating content 5 years ago. I would record myself doing the same take again and again and again because I said the words funny or what have you. And so I would repeat the same paragraph like 20 times, which you think that that's like really strenuous. Well, when you edit it, it's even more strenuous to try to find like, which is the take that's okay enough that I can like use. And that would be such an arduous experience, because editing is such an interesting experience, because you are looking at yourself and you are trying to kind of piece together the most like picture perfect version of yourself, or the most like outwardly, you're like curating that version of yourself. At the same time of curating, you're also like, I'm like putting myself down, like it's like in reinforcing the thought of like, God, mine was like my grammar, like, man, you really don't sound like really smart. Oh my gosh, like you really don't sound like you went to college. Because I didn't, right? It's like just kept reinforcing that, like the editing process, it was just reinforcing these thoughts for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Wow.
And I think that that's kind of the challenge when you're first starting and you're like creating and editing a piece of content, and you don't have the right mindset or the emotional state for it. You're actually taking like your negative feelings about yourself and just kind of reinforcing that, and then putting that out there, and being like, I hope no one saw, they like see the best version of me, and I hope it's good enough, right? So I want to know, like, how you got to from that place of like crying on your first podcast to being able to say yes today to being on camera and doing a podcast, and just like being more open to this experience. Like, what's that evolution like? How many years did it take? Like, what are the steps to get from where you were to where you are today?
This is really fun. I was about to ask you the same question. I was like, girl, what's your secret? You're like liberated. You're so good on social. I'm not sure if there was a lot of evolution, to be honest. This feels very, very uncomfortable for me. So I just have a practice of every now and then, like making sure that I am stepping outside of my comfort zone. So I'm always growing. So this does not, like, obviously we have a connection and relationship. So it's easier for me to do it. If you were a stranger, I think it would be much different. So I do feel safer in this space. But honestly, like, I still, like, I will show up more on stories every now and then when I feel called, but I'm still not overly confident when it comes to like video content. And honestly, like, not to answer this question, but something that you said, kind of like I realized a theme for myself when for you, like the fear was like, I'm not smart, or I don't sound smart, because it reinforces this kind of like limiting belief, like I didn't go to college. I think for me, because you need to understand my background. I come from Lithuania, which is part of the Baltic states, which is part of the ex-Soviet Union, the whole country, the whole kind of block, right? Women from this region are not like known to be beautiful. Like, at least that's kind of like the very cliche thing. Like, they use a lot of makeup, they're beautiful, they take care of the bodies, right? They kind of lead with their looks. And I, growing up, always felt like I was a very average looking woman amongst all the models, right? And I think maybe that was when I was listening. I think for me, it was more like not even what I was saying that I would edit out, but more like what I'm looking like. And am I looking presentable and beautiful enough? Because my standard of what I thought was beauty was so high, because I was used to be surrounded by such beautiful women. Half of my class were models, honestly. Like, the gene pool in here is like really beautiful. So I think for me, what is kind of remains of like, yeah, you really need to look beautiful. Otherwise, you're not allowed to like show up, speak up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm just imagining like you went to model school. You're like in a school of models. And at the time of being like, I just, think about myself being 11 or 12 years old. I'm like chubbier than most girls.
Yeah.
And I was like awkward, and I had, bad teeth, and people would make fun of, my lips for being too big, which now I'm like, but there's all those insecurities. And then imagining my like young self and then going to a school with models, I just can't imagine what that experience is like.
But that's exactly what you're describing is how I felt, because I was chubbier. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of my class, not all, but like majority of them were like tall, super skinny, like just naturally that kind of athletic type. Do you know what I mean? Like, getting so much attention from the boys, and you were kind of like invisible, right? Like, if you were, probably you felt that too, right? Like, you were just invisible. So I'm like, honestly, I don't look like them. I'm not allowed to like speak up, show up. Like, that's not for those girls. That's not for girls like me.
Damn. That took it a whole nother level, because I've been using this quote, I forget from whom, but it was like, we think we're not good enough versions of what we see online, like models and actresses, right? We think we're not good enough, but actually they are terrible representations of the real woman. And so I've been using that in my mind a lot. Like, yeah, every time I see this beautiful person online, I'm like, that's such a terrible representation. Like, I see a pop star, I'm like, that's a terrible representation of the average woman or the average teen woman. But for you, I could imagine that would be a harder thing to receive if the average woman where you're at is like a model. Like, that blows my mind.
Honestly, and then I remember I left school and I went to study in London, England, right? And it's kind of like different people. And I remember when I would get a compliment when people or guys, they would tell me, "Oh, you're beautiful." I'll be like, "Oh, no, I'm average." And I would like, honestly, like, it was such a deep, like, it didn't even felt like I'm putting down. I'm like, "Oh no, I'm cute. I'm not beautiful." And I remember it was just so like, Jeremy, like so deep seated for me. Like, yeah, I think I'm processing that even as I'm speaking now. So I think I would think one of the reasons why it never felt safe for me to be seen is because like I'm not meeting the standards that were set for me growing up. Right.
Yeah. So then at some point when you were in England or and traveled to other spaces, were you like, oh, I am actually more pretty than people here?
I don't want to say like that, but I think then when I would like maybe get more like affirmation or more attention, I'll be like, well, I guess I'm not like, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay. But that fear or that like kind of like inner measurement system remained within. Right. So
Yeah.
even in many ways, I came out of my shelf and like I became like who I am essentially today, outspoken and loud and proud. But certain aspects, like they're still so deeply programmed. So when you ask me about my evolution, I'll be like, girl, I'm not sure what evolution there is. It's still very much something that is like work in progress. Like, I am on camera. I'm not putting myself down, right? I'm on camera, but it's still very much like, what are like, do you remember when I asked you, like, how are we going to record it? Where are you going to use it? Like which parts are you going to use? I still ask you all of these questions even today. Right. So
Yeah, but I feel like that is still such an evolution, right? Because you're leading with curiosity, you're leading with like, okay, kind of like setting the boundaries within yourself of like, okay, what is the situation? What's the space like? How much control do I have? But that's such a big evolution compared to, oh my God, I don't want to be on here. No, 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 I don't want to be seen, right? Like that is like an extreme evolution for many people who were in your situation when you first started. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't see that per se, but
many years of like little bits, you know what I mean? Like kind of like pushing myself out there. Maybe that's
exactly.
why I feel like it's a big growth. But I do want to like ask you that question because we were chatting before recording and I told you that like for me, like landing on your feet on social feels like a like somatic like out breath and release of like that's how I feel because I feel like you are so embodied and you seemingly free and seems like you're having fun with social and you're breaking all the rules and you're allowing yourself to be seen, vulnerable, maybe not always with makeup on and perfect looking, right? And like what was your story and how did you achieve that? Knowing that you also edited yourself at the beginning of your journey. That's an evolution. And I love to hear what was your process.
I think that I had to find something bigger than myself that I could attach myself to. I think the thing that I found that was bigger than myself was like, I've always been obsessed with authenticity. Like when I was like 19, I started to create films and documentaries about my dad. And my dad was gay and hid that for my entire life. And then when he finally came out when I was 15, he was already always an alcoholic, but then he got into drugs and it became, he started to become homeless. And I was dealing with, it was a very interesting experience for me because I was like, instead of just feeling like, oh my God, this is so terrible, I felt very curious. And so I would document him. I created a documentary about him coming out. I created a documentary of him going crazy and trying to take him to rehab. And I was always very curious about the authentic experience people have in hard situations. So I think that like me being behind the camera and documenting this and observing him helped me better understand him and myself with a little bit of separation. The lens created a little bit of separation. And I think that when I see a lens, or when I'm on camera, I think of it as I have the capability of blowing through inauthentic, fake things or pretending, and I have the possibility of showing some truth. And I really love the idea of truth. And that matters. That's like a value of mine, right? Like a deep core value of mine because of my turmoil with my dad and him hiding so much and him being inauthentic, that I was like, oh, I don't want to be that. I want to be truthful, because if you're not truthful, it means that you can be hiding yourself, and that will lead to drugs and you being on the street. That was my mentality for a while. So that was like kind of came from a place of fear. Like I need to be authentic. Otherwise it's like, it's as a survival skill. But the other thing I think was like, I had to change how I viewed myself. I thought I was so focused on the like words I was using instead of the overall message. And I started to change, like, it's not about the the words. It's about like, what is the impact that I'm able to have with people? And at that time, just me sharing a couple videos, I had people reach out to me and say, hey, I felt like seen. I felt understood. I feel like I'm not alone. I feel, there was that. Okay. And then the final thing actually to this is that I love being rebellious. That's a big part of who I am. Since I was young, I was like, if someone told me I needed to go, to college, I was like, I'm not going to go to college then because I don't want to do what I'm supposed to do. And I was always going against the grain. I hated following the rules. And so if people are trying to be perfect online, I'm like, I don't want to do that then. And that's also just a part of my core value and who I am. And I think that we all have something within us, some sort of like fear or value or something that means more than our looks or our insecurities. I think we sometimes just have to dig a little bit deeper to find it. And that's part of the work that like I do with people is digging deeper, deeper, deeper beyond the fears. There's more. There's something that hits home emotionally, deeply wounding from our families or what have you. And we discover like what matters more than this insecurity and how do I let myself like lean in and get attached to the bigger message, to the ideology that I can be attached to.
Love. And I think that's such a great takeaway also for the listeners is like, if you were really fearful, because I'm thinking of myself as you were talking, for me, it's more like really spreading the message about like career change and understand, like talking about what a multi-layered, fascinating process it is. And knowing like I've been through a really dramatic career change. I always say it was so dramatic. I was such a drama queen about it. And like it feels so lonely as well. And it feels such a scary place because you're not who you are anymore, but you don't know where you're going at. And it also at the same time feels like no one really gets what you're going through. Like your immediate environment is probably going to be like, are you okay? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what's going on? And I feel like for me, remembering how painful and lonely and scary that place is, that's my why, where sometimes I will come on camera or I will record the podcast because I want them to feel less alone. So for me, I guess I'm connecting with what you're saying about like beyond the fear, there's something there that you can always reach to. And that could be your like lifeline and inspiration, right? And then probably if you reach there like long enough or like just a lot, after some time that becomes bigger because it grows. The more you feed your attention to it, it grows and then it can even overshadow the fears that you have. I don't know. Do you feel like that could happen?
Yeah. So I think like how it worked for me is that I had this ideology about being authentic, right? And that kind of carried me through. And then it was like, okay, my message and having impact and helping people, that carried me through. But those things don't carry me through anymore. Like those don't hit home for me. Those don't have the same emotional charge for me. So it's kind of like constantly looking within and seeing what has emotional charge for me. It's like a reservoir of energy when I hit that spot. And now what it is, which we talked about a little bit before we got on the call, which is like, I realized that my dad had deep creativity within himself. He wanted to be a director. He wanted to, he wrote scripts. He was really into sci-fi, but yet he never was able to do it. He worked at Universal, and he just never was able to flex that part of him. And I believe, and this is my story I tell myself, I believe that he got really into crystal meth specifically after alcohol because he loves the fantasy world that he gets to go into. He loves the imagination that all the places he's like, I'm Jesus Christ one day. He's got aliens like landing on his roof. Like he lives in a sci-fi, and that's the world he wanted to create. That was his imagination when that was already within him. And so I think that if people aren't able to live in their creative flow and their creative imagination and allow themselves to come out and live in that place, in that magic, then they're going to try to seek it in other ways that are more destructive. So even if that, and sometimes people like will come to alcohol or drugs or what have you, but it's sometimes like, needing to travel a ton and feel freedom, but then they don't feel still good about it long term. Like they're like, oh, I still don't feel alive. And I think that that's for me, like once I started to like, hey, I love magic. I love fantasy. I love Harry Potter. I started to incorporate that into my life and into my business. And like, even right now I have like a Harry Potter, you know, image back here. You can't even see it, but there's a Harry Potter image back here. There's like this card that says magical. I had to like literally change my whole world and life to incorporate the magic in my mind so that I'm like, oh my God, this world is so wonderful, so amazing to be in, and helping people find their own creative magic and how to make their lives feel magical is to me a life or death situation. And then that drives me now.
Yeah, and I love that you dug so deep and you understand, like you have so much self-awareness to understand the connection, like where and why this has become your like the model of the world, and why it's so important for you to find that magic in healthy ways and channel your creativity in healthy, like sustainable ways versus reaching for maybe what your father opted for. And I think that is fascinating to me to hear that, like the link that you have with the childhood, because I feel like when we're growing up, we have two choices when we see our main caregivers. We either become like them if we're not careful, we just copy paste the pattern, which happens a lot in our relationships without knowing, right? We're just like copy pasting the same model. Or we see and we grow up seeing that and we like, I'll do whatever it takes to not become that. So what does it take for me to create this different world for myself? So I love that you're like living in magic world. So when you're like posting your like reels now and things, does it ever still cross your mind of like, oh yeah, like that's like someone may write like a mean comment on that one? Does it still cross your mind at all ever?
Yeah. I think like, oh, what if someone wrote a mean comment and I already know the answer? I'm like, oh, I would just delete them and block them. So I don't really worry about it. I just like, well, I'll just turn a blind eye and just ignore it. And it happens so rarely that I don't really worry about it. I think that like, oh, you know, it depends on the type of content you're creating too. And that if you're trying to be quite generic, sometimes you may pull in people from actually here's another thing too. Like if you have a lot more generic content, and I also find that TikTok is a little bit more like open to kind of not the most elevated audience sometimes.
Girl.
Like
love it. Dig it, TikTok.
Like I find that people there comment really like are very unaware people that just comment whatever is like on their mind and aren't thinking that much. They're not on TikTok to think. And so you kind of also can play around with the platform. Well, I'm like, I'm not going to take TikTok that seriously because the audience here seems not like what I want to pull in. I haven't had any of those problems on Instagram. On YouTube, it feels like sometimes there's people that are rude and I just delete them. Like I don't really have a problem with that. I don't care. To me, it's like, this is my world, bitch. And I'm gonna do whatever the fuck I want. And if you want to come up into my world and be like, what are you doing? Why are you wearing that? I'll be like, bitch, get out. That's how I see it. Like, this is my magic palace and there's no rude or negativity allowed in my magic palace. Like I need to keep it clean for myself.
This is I love that. And you know what I mean? I feel like when people again are thinking of coming into this space, they think that like every post that they will write, they're going to get like 5 negative comments and then like 1 like. Do you know what I mean? Like we kind of dramatize and catastrophize, and it's not true. To your point, like for me, I was just talking about that with my clients. It was like in the past years, I only got 1 negative comment that I'm aware of. Maybe there are some that I'm not aware of. And it was generic negative comment about coaching industry versus therapy. And also, you know, I kind of got that comment and I was like, hold on, you're coming to my digital living room. My feed is my digital living room. And you just shat on my table. And you want me to engage with you? Like, what do you want me to tell you? So block, delete. Thank you very much. I'm not here to change your mind, because that if you need me to tell you that coaching works, we're not aligned. You're not my audience. I can't help you probably. You need to go towards different people, you know? And I was listening to a video the other day about like how to deal with haters as well. And I love the advice that this person gave was, well, number one, ignore. Always ignore. This is the true point. This is your space. This is your kingdom. If they're coming in there, clearly not having done the research, not read your comment, not even trying to understand where you're coming from, they just want to be negative, you ignore. Or sometimes you agree with them. If they tell you you're like a stupid, ugly bitch, you're like, yeah, I am. Do you know what I mean? Like you should see what I look like in the morning and add like something else. And you go like, then you kind of like take all the weapons from them. And they're neutralized. There's no energy left for them because they're waiting for that fight, right? Like a lot of these people, they want that attention. But again, I don't feel like this is in our universe. It's not really something like I don't even think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, it's strange because so many people, like you said, so many people are afraid of the comment. And I'm like, I've literally gotten maybe 4 in the last 5 years. So that's like averaging once a year, maybe. And they're not even that bad. Like they're not anything that really like wrecks my heart. And I sometimes like and if that happens, sometimes I'll just be like, okay, this isn't for YouTube, but sometimes I've gotten like weird messages on my phone and I've had to deal with something challenging in my life, let's say around my dad and some challenging situation. I just hand it over to my husband. I'm like, can you like read this email or delete it or respond or do some or block this number? Like I just asked my husband to be a part of this. And so that's always an option too. If you start to see like a weird comment, you can ask for someone else, a best friend or someone, can you delete it, manage it, block it? Like, I don't even want to look at this thing. And then I want you to hold me and support me because I feel shitty. And you just have like a system for handling things that's like really loving and really supportive. And you have other people in your life that you can reach out to in that moment if it happens.
Love that. That's a great advice. So why do you think, like, I'm going to go like deep now. So why do you think people are so scared of being seen and being visible, which is like what you talk about? I felt the weight of that question as well.
Because there's just so many reasons, but I think it always comes back down to something within the family, something within the dynamic when you're younger, that you've dealt with that just pops up. And sometimes, you know, clients will have family members that they had like many siblings and they were not seen or their needs weren't understood or they didn't get the spotlight. Some people, like their parents stole so much of the spotlight and they felt like they had to take care of their parents. And so they think being in the spotlight is wrong. Sometimes it's, you know, your look and just like not feeling like you're beautiful enough. And we live in a culture, you know, I talk about how I live in the Britney Spears era where it was like, oh, that's what a 15-year-old should look like. Oh, well, let me just go throw up now. And, you know, I was bulimic for a while when I was younger. I was like, I don't look like this. And that was really challenging, right? So we have a lot of things that are kind of sometimes beneath the surface. Like we don't even realize that these things in our past and in our experiences, they kind of seem more nuanced sometimes. They're not so, it's like, not so important to be seen. Like you can still maneuver life and like have a partner in life and get a good job and do well in your job or do well in school without necessarily needing to be so seen. And so it kind of goes, it's like a little bit undetected sometimes. Like you're aware of it, but it doesn't like fuck up your life. You know, you can still have a great life without needing to be seen. So then there comes a point where if you are an ambitious person or you're somebody who's like wanting suddenly these desires and urges come up to like, I want to like have a business or I want to like be on a stage or I want to like, it sounds fun for me to like have a little personal brand. Or sometimes it's like, I want to have financial freedom and I want to have a business, right? So we have these like inner desires that start to creep up. And at one point, the desire starts to like meet the being seen, like fear, like those start to like match up, and they're like, uh-oh, it's a little bit of a battle now, where it's like, well,
Conflict.
I don't, like, I want to do this thing. It's like, no, we don't want to be seen. And it's like, wait, huh? Like, and you have to start to like dive into the roots of something that maybe you've been avoiding or didn't think was important for a while. And
Yeah.
that can be really like uncomfortable to want to face initially.
100%. Also, you can always just gag and go,
What's
right?
that?
With gag and go, you're super scared, you're about to puke, and you still do it. Kind of how I released the first episode, where like I didn't go into my childhood. I just like nearly puked and like I died, and then I still did it. And then it became easier. And only now as I'm talking to you, I'm like, oh, it makes sense why it was so hard for me to do it. Like I'm only unpacking it now. So I feel like gag and go, fake it till you make it. It could be a strategy, right? If done right, still with a lot of safety and understanding that you will need to like maybe, nurture and take care of your nervous system and have a lot of space between you do that, right? So I think it's still, but I want also like what you said with the childhood, and I completely agree, is like how we grew up, everything is down to that, right? Like that early developmental years really created a program. This is our software. And if we're not careful, if we're not aware, it will run the rest of our life. And also another layer, because I see everything as layered cake. There are so many layers to everything, right? Especially in healing. Because I tend to work with a lot of light workers, and we spoke about that before recording. Light workers, like a very broad term for people who are here to help other people, the planet, collective, like in general, right? Many different ways how they want to feel. They feel the need to contribute. And a lot of them are only discovering, say, what that is now, right? As they're leaving corporate, as they're becoming really misaligned. I work with a lot of them, and I feel like with the light workers, there's another layer, which is like ancestral wounding. Us coming from, whether we know or don't know, perhaps maybe lineages of healers. And as you know, healers didn't have a good time up until now. Only now we can be out in the open and be like, this is my gift and I monetize that, and these are my boundaries and I'm not hiding. I'm proud of it, right? So as healers, as women, where we never had a voice and never felt safe to speak, to be sexual, to be vocal, to be loud, to be seen in general as a full-blown, capable human being. So I feel like we also add that layer. And then sometimes, again, that fear then becomes even more irrational of like, I love my business. I believe in what I do. And every time I'm in front of the camera or something, I freeze, right? Like,
Yeah.
that. Have you found that too? Like some people with a mission state?
Yeah, I think that, when I think about ancestral trauma and witch wound, or just the idea of women from many cultures and past generations have had to stay quiet in order to survive, right? So if you are vocal or say all your thoughts and just your authentic self out on the streets, like perhaps you might be killed or brutally tortured in front of groups, and that taught the whole audience, never do this. This is bad. But what I also like to think about is like, of course, there's going to be historically these types of women who've been burned at the stake, and people who've watched and observed and realized this is not okay. I'm not going to go about that. We've also have had in our ancestral lineage women who have spoken up, women who have defied, and women who have done things despite the fact that they might die because of what they're doing. Extremely courageous women. And I've looked into my past and found, some history on my lineage from Canada. This woman who went from from France to Canada, and had to like endure a long ship ride and be one of the first settlers in Canada, and there was like all this, she had to leave her entire family because her family were getting killed by the Catholics, right? So there was so much history. And so as I what I've decided is like, I want to connect to those ancestors and feel the bravery and courageousness of what they've endured in order for me to be here. And I get to live in a world where I'm not going to be I'm not going to be killed and tortured for speaking my mind. And so I speak with the courage of these women. One also being my grandmother who left Korea to go to Japan because she had an arranged marriage, and she was like, I'm not going to do this. And she risked her life during the Korean War to travel hiding in a boat to Japan. And I think about that's just two people that I know of. There are thousands and thousands of women who have done something so courageous. And I think, wow, if I could just take a little bit of that, because I'm not risking my life, if I could just take a little bit of what they've done and they've gone through, and I take that on and I put that into my heart, and then I speak for them, and I speak for all the women who weren't able to speak because of their fear. And I allow myself to be an embodiment of all of those women when I speak. And that's another way that I allow myself to emotionally, I read stories about torture and stuff like that creates that emotional part in my heart where I cry when I listen to stories of women who've had to show their vaginas on, in front of people and show their witch marks. And I allow myself to go deep and feel emotional and feel angry as fuck. And then I'm like, this is what's driving me today to speak my mind and be on camera, do whatever the fuck I want. I allow it to empower me, that anger. And I think that that's another challenge is not a lot of women allow themselves to feel anger.
Oh yeah, the sacred rage. I love that. The sacred rage. And I love how you are tuning into that and channeling it versus using that as a reason why it's hard for you to do something or not do something. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
I love that. Yeah. Tuning into the rage and be no, because of them, I'm here and I'm going to use my voice. And I want to share, also just to add to that experience, over the weekend, I went to this somatic, it's kind of like a movement medicine, school of movement medicine. And they had the whole somatic weekend, somatic experiences and conscious dancing to connect with the ancestors. And it was all the theme about ancestral theme and clearing and building the connection. And to your point, I too have half of my family, my father comes from this tribe called Tartars, which is they are long descendants from Genghis Khan, so Mongolia, and they've always been sort of tribes that travel around the world, and they would settle wherever they're invited. They're the warrior tribes. And so there were a lot of healers, and shamanism was very permanent in that. And when, I tuned into their energy, energetically, right? When I was connecting with them, there's so much power and there's so much pride and there's so much the message is have your head held high and be proud that you can speak and use your voice and don't be afraid to use the voice. I'm getting emotional because the energy is so strong. So when you talk about this, right, and kind of connecting to that rage, and it's almost a responsibility in a way as well of we can speak our mind and speak our truth or dance half naked on social and not be killed and not be tortured and not be raped. So it's our job to do that, especially if you have something to share that could help others.
Yeah. Yes. Right. I think it is something worth dancing over. It is something worth, I talked about this in another video, which was it is not a glamorous experience to be your authentic self and to be on camera and to share your truth. It's not a glamorous thing like we think it's supposed to be. We're oh yeah, Rihanna up there doing her thing, Beyonce, Britney, all these people who seem so glamorous being seen. But actually it's not a glamorous experience, because to be seen is a vulnerable experience. And what we have to deal with when we're in a vulnerable experience is this is a hard thing, but it's still the only thing we're really dealing with is feelings, is emotions, is discomfort, right? So it's really uncomfortable in the body. And so we have to learn, okay, how do we manage discomfort in the body? But this is the least that we can do. This is the least that we can do because our ancestors have had to risk rape, torture, shaming, right? Like being murdered, all these things. Like those were big risks that they had to take, right? Like, damn, I just have to deal with feelings. And they could feel really awful, but I have to remember that it is just sensations in the body. If we break it down scientifically, what it actually is and go, can I deal with sensations in the body? Am I willing to work with discomfort or uncomfortable sensations in the body? Can I pay that price for my ancestors and what they had to go through? Am I willing to do it? Then you get to like have more of a choice if you break it down in that way and you start to like use your ancestry as a way to kind of compare and to like, again, what we're trying to look for, what I'm always trying to look for is like, where is the emotional hit that I can take that's beyond what my little fears are in this moment?
I love that. Yeah, because if there is nothing you're unwilling to feel, there will be nothing you will be unable to do. Because it's all the only thing that's usually in the way are the feelings. And I feel like you touched on discomfort, and I feel like that is, I don't know, I hear a lot of like speakers talk about like, oh, our generation is like so entitled and lazy, and they didn't have to work hard for anything. We didn't experience war, all of that. And sometimes, I don't fully agree with it, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, I feel like we do sometimes settle, and we kind of settle in the comfortable, convenient life and mode. And every time we're challenged a little bit, we're like, no, I'm fine. I'm opting out. Like, I'm not here to feel uncomfortable, but the price of growth is feeling comfortable with the discomfort and trying, at least aspiring to get there.
Yeah, it's interesting because we live now in a life of luxury compared to our ancestors, right? We have everything we can kind of want and need in this life. And so culture, like, I mean, not all cultures and not all people, but for a majority, and especially people who are listening, are probably quite comfortable in life. And I see it as complete luxury. Mm-hmm. When you're in a luxurious experience, like if you imagine you're on a boat, on a yacht, and you've got beautiful champagne and like the most decadent, like high quality macaroons. It's like, oh my God, so delicious. And, you're just enjoying it. And then suddenly a waiter spills ink all over your pants. You're like, oh my God, right? Like, oh my God, this is ruining the experience. But if we take a step back, we go, well, girl, you're on a luxury boat in your white outfit, expensive clothes, like that's not that bad. But in your mind, you're like, this is terrible. I feel like we're kind of living on these luxury boats and we don't know it. And anytime there's like a little spill in life, we're like, we're overwhelmed by it. But it's only because we don't see that we're in complete luxury. And I think that that's when we can start to like a lot of people who are waking up to this. It's like they're just putting on the lens of going, oh yeah, life is luxurious. I can have anything I want. I can order Chinese food when I want. I don't have to cut the chicken, find a chicken. I don't got to like run for my life. Like those are all things our ancestors had to deal with. So we are still dealing with the mindset and some of the survival mind like our ancestors had, but we're living in a life of luxury. And so it's a very weird disconnecting time where we're not sure. It's an interesting phasing. I notice like Gen Z don't have the same exact fears like we do. They're a little bit more outspoken. They're a little bit more like, I'm not going to follow the status quo. They're a little bit more ballsy because I think.
Right. Yeah. I'm not, sorry. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. I want to add to that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of that, but like as I'm listening to you, I feel like that's so you gave such a beautiful visual example of like we live in luxury, and then every little thing we're like, oh my gosh, my macaroon crumbled, right? Like the pistachio filling is not as beautiful as I remember it to be, but like also at the same time, I feel like, especially like I see that with Gen Z, like no shade, a little bit of shade, but like. because everything is so available, when they don't get their way, when they don't get the successful business up and running in 30 days, when they don't get that partner maybe that they're after, when they don't get promoted in half a year to like a senior level, then they're like really upset and they're like, I'm out of here, I'm out of here. And it creates a lot of like non-committal relationships and experiences where like, yes, they're very well spoken and they're like have very strong boundaries, but also I feel like they don't know or understand the price of what it actually takes to achieve something that's sustainable. Generalizing massively, okay? But like I'm kind of seeing that as well, that dissonance in their experience as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how, because it's interesting for me because I'm 35 now and I'm like, oh, I'm not the young, cool
Me too, girl.
generation.
We're millennial. We're like aging millennial. We're like, that's it. It's not our time anymore.
It's weird to be in the middle because we're seeing what was our past and how our families dealt with emotions and feelings, which is like sweep that shit under the rug, sweep it under the rug. Our generation is like, okay, no, we need to worry about mental health. We need to think about feelings, but we're still quite timid and like figuring it out. And then the younger generation is just like kind of more in their feels and very communicative about what they're going through.
Very emotionally intelligent. Yeah.
Yes, very emotionally intelligent, but then they're not necessarily, like you said, like they're not understanding longevity or sustain, like how to sustain your energy for things that are challenging, perhaps, or, it's a very interesting place to be in where I'm like in between the two. And it's kind of fun because in my mind, I'm like the best of both.
Well, what the generation before is that you remember when they used to speak about millennials? We're like, oh, millennials in the workforce, and now we're like, well, now deal with Gen Z. You were complaining about millennials. We're at least fucked in our head enough where we at least got the job done. Do you know what I mean? Like we would at least have some sense of responsibility and like take some shit and actually, do you know what I mean? Like grow through the hardship. We had that because that's what our parents' generation did, right? Whereas, yeah, well, anyway, like each generation. We're not here to compare and contrast or say which is better. Like we all serve a purpose. I feel like millennial generation, like collectively as an energetic signature, are here to like question and fuck things up, right? And I feel like Gen Z is here to like really set the scene and bring it a new way, the new paradigm. We're kind of here like we are a lot of the same generation, like indigo children. We're all about like being angry and rebellious at the status quo. So we're here like these, like, I don't know, like demolition machines of like structures, and we question and what's the purpose and why we're doing that. And we're refusing to do that, right? And then the next generations are coming in to build something new. So we all serve a purpose, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah, that's true. It is like we're setting the stage a little bit, and then it's like, what are they gonna do with this stage? What are they gonna do with it? I wonder. And
me too. Well, we're probably not going to be in our bodies. We're going to have popcorn during like watching the Earth TV show. Be like, oh, they fucked that up. If we were there, we would have done it. Like a lot of a spiritual community. I'm sure your listeners and my listeners are spiritual. A lot of my teachers used to say is like the souls that incarnated on the planet in this pivotal transformational time when we're switching paradigms are crazy motherfuckers, because you really need to have a lot of tenacity. You really need to, like, you have amnesia. You don't even know why you're here, but you feel so called to do something different and support the planet. And it's really, really hard right now because the world is going to shit as we know it. Everything, there's so much change every day. So not all the souls would volunteer to experience a lifetime like that. Right?
Yes.
Even if you're like
courageous.
Even if you're like, that's what they say, if you're like a bum on a street without, no disrespect to anyone, and you have like this time on your resume on the planet Earth, you're a badass. Even if you literally did nothing, just existed somewhere. You're like a badass.
I like that idea. Well, I want to like, speaking of spirituality and purpose and coming into this earth, like, is there anything that you are able to connect within your purpose that allows you to allow yourself to be more seen or more visible or more heard? How do you or do you connect to purpose, to your inner purpose? And does that change, evolve, or is it like a set purpose you feel like you're here for?
That's a very good question. No one has asked me that question because I feel like I talk about everyone else's purpose. I feel like my direction always remains the same, of like breaking the status, which is what I said, breaking the status quo. Even like my approach to career change or career development is quite unconventional. Is because I'm like reimagining the way that we think about career and how we find aligned career, because we're not really taught about like get to know yourself and then see what fits. Get to know your astrological blueprint, if you will, your career blueprint, and then see what is aligned with that versus, oh, let's just look outside of me for answers and clues of what I should be, right? So for me, I think the overall goal does remain the same, to help people find their truth and their authenticity. And I mostly feel called to support mission-focused individuals who are here to support others, right? Like I said, like light workers. Now, how I do that is slightly evolving, and I think is going to expand and change through the course of my lifetime. So it's coaching now. I'm doing groups. There might be like I'm dreaming of like a career change summit, career change retreats, right? Like writing books and kind of seeing all these different mediums. But I think the overall direction is kind of the same. And me knowing myself and say I'm really into astrology and kind of understanding my chart, or like HD, right? Like I'm a manifester, which is kind of like do your thing. Are you a I think you're a manifester too, no?
Mm-hmm.
Or Manjan? No, you're a manifester.
Yeah. Yeah.
So very similar energy of like we're kind of like marching to our own little beat. And the more we like listen to that, the more we can be on mission and live by design. Or like in my astrology chart is like my first house, which is self-expression, is like most of the planets are there, which is like whatever I'm supposed to do here is kind of like live my life, translate my experiences, and share it with the world. And this is like literally my life's work. I really don't have much action anywhere else. Right. So it's like through my own individuality and experiences, like helping others get to their truth and authenticity in their first house of self-expression. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
No, yeah. I think like you definitely answered, like you've got such a vision for your purpose and your mission.
And it's evolving. You know what I mean? It's like an ever-evolving alive entity that is always informing me sometimes of stuff where I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like, yeah, I love that you are, it's an interesting thing when we're talking about self-expression, purpose, visibility, and there's all these, to kind of wrap it up and bring it back to our original question that I asked, which was like, self-expression has so many different forms and so many different ways of being heard and experienced by others. And visibility and being seen on camera is just one way in this current, how we're in our current state, because who knows, maybe with AI, you don't even have to be seen. Maybe you have an avatar that you're able to project and, you could completely change your voice or whatever it is. Like who knows what's going to happen in the future. But there are so many different ways to access expression. And there are so many different types of people that you can learn from, yourself or myself, to play in the expression that works or feels most connected to you and your soul and your spirit. And that there are people like me who are just like, oh, I love being on camera. And I believe, I have a connection to the camera and being seen and what that means for my authenticity, and how I think that that's healing for people to see me be liberated on camera. And then there's you who you've done things a lot through, podcast and through, you're still seen on camera in your groups and stuff, but through your podcast, that's how I found you, which is like listening to one episode and being like, oh, I feel understood. I feel seen. And, all the different ways that it can happen. It doesn't have to be one certain way. So do you want to just add anything to that around like, all the different ways to express or
Yeah. Totally. I think you just summed it up so beautifully. And I want to like second to what you say, like seeing you liberated on social is so healing. And to your point, it doesn't even matter what you're saying or what you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like I remember still what vividly for years in one of the reels that like just kind of like released something within me when you filmed yourself walking your dog and then you're like, does anyone else add beer to your coffee cup when you're walking your dog or something? I was like, oh my God, I'm healed. Like that is so relatable and just so raw and real. And just, you know what I mean? Like it probably took you like literally 30 seconds to actually put it together and be like, oh, okay. maybe we'll, give some ideas for people as they walk.
All kinds of healing. Oh, there's all kinds.
Right, that's what I mean. So it's not even what you say, but like your energy, right? Is your energy and the way you show up and the relationship that you have with the camera is healing for people. And I think you summed it really beautifully. It's like, just like tune in. And if you really feel called to share your gift, to start a business, just start a side hustle, whatever it is that you're called to do, really ask yourself, okay, what would be that path of least resistance for me right now in this current version of myself in my self-expression? Maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's just a post and just literally just no graphics, nothing, just written word. Like you can find something and take it from there, take it day by day. Because at some point you may get inspired and be like, oh, let me try something else. And also I think another piece that I wanted to add as well, because you were talking earlier that came up, is like when you asked about the purpose, I think what sometimes helps people to also show up is self-awareness, is like understanding your purpose and mission. If you have access to that or have someone who can help you clarify that. I'm not even like talking about myself, but like, so even just getting a birth chart reading if you're into astrology, and then them like saying, oh, you have a midhaven in Leo, you're very afraid of that, but you're meant to be seen, right? Or your North Node is like in Aries or Leo, which is all about your authentic self-expression and doing that unapologetically. So sometimes, when we get that like outside validation, it also gives some fuel and like, be like, okay, it's really scary, but I feel like there's something there for me and I'm going to overcome that fear. So I think like self-awareness with whatever modality or teachers that you resonate with, I think that also helps.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, the meeting of, when we talked about, there's a desire for something, desire to be on camera, a desire to change your career, a desire to start a business. When that meets the fear, that to me is such a beautiful place actually of like understanding purpose even deeper, because that's like the meeting of change. Or potential change. And that whenever that's happened for me, like I'm like, I want to do this thing in my business. I have this desire, a spark, but I'm scared. And I'm like, oh, and every time I meet it and I invite it in and I play with it and I find ways to see it and experience it differently, that's always when I unlock another chapter within my purpose, in my purpose book, my purpose Bible. I'm like, oh, and I think that for a lot of people who are healers or light workers or people who want to help other people, you have to experience it for yourself to be able to help other people with it. And no one wants to listen to someone who has not gone through the murk and the mud of the experience where they can understand the nuances of the pain, the nuances of the fears. And then you feel so like open and understanding and loving to yourself for going through it. And then you're able to give that love to the next person that you support. And so it's such a beautiful experience to have.
I love what you said. This is so powerful because I think a lot of the times people think before coming into this like field, they'd be like, well, I need to be sorted and healed before I can help others. I'm like, well, no, hold on. Your healing journey never stops. You're always, always working on something and uncovering something and going deeper and deeper, right? So like, and the fact that you're going through this is your initiation and your preparation. This is your degree to work with other people. Because if you don't have sometimes reference points, even if they're individual to you and unique to you, you can't hold the space, this safe space for someone else going through it. Because then unknowingly you may project, you may gaslight them, right? You may not be like gentle enough with their experience because you haven't gone through that. You're like, what's the problem? Why are we still here? Right? So to your point, like earning those stripes through personal experiences is so important, which is like, I think overlooked. It's not about certification or getting degrees. It's about actually walking the walk.
Yes. Like, and like you, when you're talking about it, it's like, it doesn't end. Like the healing journey doesn't end. And especially when you first, like, there's like one breakthrough thing, right? Maybe it's like for me speaking, right? And feeling confident and loving myself. But then it's like, 6 months later, I'm like, oh, I have this fear around creating a course, or I have this fear around starting a business, right? It's like, actually, it's kind of like a domino effect of one coming after another. And then every time you overcome it, you're like, oh, this could be the next part of my path in my business. And it keeps life interesting. And it like evolves your repertoire or your curriculum and your education in the and living.
Especially for you, girl. Like for you is like weekly upgrades.
My husband laughs at me because he calls it like my morning breakthrough. He's like, every day is a new breakthrough. Like he's tired of hearing about them. But I'm like, I learned this thing. I got to tell people. And that's what creates the drive to create a piece of content or whatever. So, you know, it's like allowing yourself to go through that first or the first few big moments of passing through the fear and getting into the next phase. And then it's like the initiation. It's the initiation. And like you said, being around people and communities that support you, see you, and like, hey, we've been through that too. We're going through it now. It's going to be okay. And then you're like, oh, it's safe here. Okay. And then you tell the people behind you, hey, it's safe here. Come over here. I can help you. I'll hold your hand through it. And I feel like it's one of the most beautiful experiences you can have in this world and in this life is to go through that.
Yeah, that's it. Amen. That's beautifully said. I think, I don't know, we'll keep on wrapping up forever, but like I want to add another point, which is like, I'm just thinking it, and maybe I'm going into your turf, but I'm just thinking of those who are like really terrified of being like visibly seen, like myself, right? Like I'm open about the fact that I'm still working through that fear of being like video seen. Is like when you are finding the path of least resistance in your self-expression, whatever the form that it is, also make sure that you're finding the topics and the themes and the messages that resonate with you the most as well. Because when we're starting a business, a lot of the times we think we need to meet some sort of standard in terms of what we should sound like, what content we should post, right? Because I said, like, your space is so healing because you're not telling me 5 ways how to beat algorithm. And this is a hook that you need to add to your reels to get more followers, right? It's like so not rigid and flowy in your content because you, a lot of the times I would imagine, follow that inspirational spark and then you create content around that. So when we're starting out, we sometimes don't know that that's what allowed. And that's what's needed to serve your audience the best, is like trust the spark, trust where your energy goes and post that, even if that doesn't neatly fit your niche or doesn't neatly fit your freaking content pillars, whatever that we tell you to do. Like follow the energy. You can never go astray if you follow it, even when your mind doesn't understand why that message is there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's really beautiful because, nowadays I think the real challenge isn't what hashtags you're using or, the time that you post. The real challenge is actually not will people comment negative comments. It's, will anyone even care? Will anyone even stop and look at this? Does this matter? Does this matter to me. And I think that they're so inundated with so much social media content on every single topic. There's so much out there that you can watch and observe. But what people really want is to feel, to heal, and to feel understood and be seen themselves. It's less about you being seen, me as the creator, but it's really about allowing the person who is receiving to be seen in what you're sharing and what you're saying. And so in order to allow someone to be seen, it has to be real and true and authentic to you. And that's the real like gift and healing capability that we all have, which is to dig deep, to look inside. What is the energy? What do I really want to share? What matters to me? What are things that I'm dealing with? What are things that I'm overcoming? What are things that I'm excited about? And allowing yourself to use it kind of like a video diary in some ways, to share it out because other people may see it and feel seen and feel connected to the world again, connected to themselves again. And I think that's like one of the most beautiful things about social media, that we don't maybe see it as such. We're like, oh, it's so harmful, it's so toxic, it's all this. But actually, I've found people like yourself and people like my clients that I have found it's been some of the most healing relationships in my life over the last few years. It's been especially healing after COVID and feeling like I don't have community and I don't have people around me and I don't feel seen and heard by the people in my life, because we're on different trajectories. We're in different places in our life, and there's nothing wrong with their place, but I'm not held, I'm not seen in my direct community around me. And the more that we can allow ourselves to find communities online, like we have something I think about this too, but we have something our ancestors never had. Like when they were dealing with like traveling the world and risking their lives, like they were alone. They didn't have a Reddit thread or a social media group to find people to be like, hey, bitch, I'm going through this. Are you? Like, yeah, me too. Right? Well, they didn't have that. They were alone. They were so alone. And that's the other thing. I'm like, oh my God, we have online community. We get to feel seen and heard by people who are going through similar things as us. We can find anyone who's the similar weirdo to us online, and we can find them and be like, hey, I'm like you, you're like me. And we can feel connected and tethered in the world as we practice being courageous, as we practice being more ourselves. And like, that's something that is like unheard of from our and past generations. And we are so fortunate. It's a gift. It's a privilege. It's a luxury. And it's like, are we going to take advantage of it?
Mm-hmm. Amen. I'm not gonna spoil it. That was perfect. If you were a religion, I would follow you. Okay. That's your compliment of today.
Oh, I'll receive that compliment. Yeah. Thank you for letting me receive that and channel through it, because it does like create an emotional cord within me. You know, it's like I've been doing a lot of ancestry work, and I've been doing a lot of that, and like allowing myself to be like, I think it's so healing, because I felt so alone for so many years within my family dynamic. I thought I was by myself. I thought I was an independent person. I thought I had to carry the family. And then of course my husband entered my life, which helped me feel less alone. But the online community has been so healing. And then the third thing is like my ancestry healing now is like, I'm not alone. And I'm so grateful for this lifetime now. And it's carrying me.
And also like for all of you, if you're like resonating with what we're saying here, and especially the ancestral line, because it seems like I too have been kind of tapping into that more, like tap into them and ask them to support you, because they're there for you. Like they're literally the that's what they say, like we are here for you, like ask us to support you, we'll give you strength. And you can, I don't know, for me it's visceral when I tap into it. I can sense like even my back straight, do you know what I mean? Like I can sense, and I'm like, yes, ooh, I feel it now, goosebumps, right? Like you can that energy, and it's so powerful. It's like generations and generations and generations of people before you with the wisdom and experiences that maybe we don't have access to now that you can tap into. And it doesn't have to be mental download, right? It's just the energy that you can use for the good. Love that.
Yeah. And even if you don't believe in it,
Still do it.
there's something that feels good about feeling less alone and just being like, I'm like, you don't have to think about as ancestor. It's like your subconscious, which are like, hey, I can use something beyond my conscious mind right now. I can use some support. And can you help me with this? Can you help me figure out this problem? Can you help me with this presentation? Can you help me feel more calm and clear today? And I just ask for something beyond me, whether it's your ancestry, your subconscious, or just whatever, anything. And I find that it has been so helpful for me to like not put so much weight on my conscious mind recently. I'm like, I just keep giving it away.
Love.
Grandparents deal with this problem.
That is so good because I feel like we're tapping more into esoteric world, which I love. And it's almost like, the darkness comes in uninvited, if you want to talk about entities and so on and so forth, which we don't have to, but like the light needs inviting. So sometimes we do need to literally voice what help we need, right? Sometimes like I went through like this mini procedure a few weeks ago. And when I was like on a table, I'm like, okay, take away the anxiety, please. Please even out my breathing because it's shallow now. Literally asking for help, and it happens. If you really believe in it, if you allow the power to come in, it happens. Remove the anxiety. Help me through this. Give me an answer. So beautiful. So powerful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think even if you don't get to the place of deeply believing in it, it's almost like it's like, do you want to believe in it? And sometimes that's enough. Like, that's kind of been I'm like, I don't know if my ancestors are listening, but I want to believe in it. And so I let that carry me energetically where I'm like, I want my ancestors to be there for me. And that's a story I choose and want to believe. And it makes my heart feel good. And that's like what matters most. And to feel less alone is what matters, is like
true.
The stories we tell.
Yeah, I feel like I'm so living in my bubble where I forget that people don't believe in this stuff. Do you sometimes feel like when you meet like the normies?
The normies.
Like sometimes, like I go out now more and like, activities and kind of meet people, and then I'll say things, and like this morning I was having a cup of coffee with a bunch of normies, and they were like, "What?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's right."
What did you say that was like a normie to the normies?
About like the auric field, because we went to like a reformer Pilates class, and I was like, oh, something like that person in the corner, like I could feel in my auric field is like very heavy. They're going through something, and they're like, what? Did she tell something? I'm like, oh no, no, never mind. How are you? But this is not me judging, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, that's what I mean. Like when you create those aligned communities, like what you and I are talking about, right? Like you sometimes forget that like alternative matrix still lives. Oops.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I love that you just let those things kind of slip out. And it's like letting a fart out. And because like sometimes like, I'm so used to farting like whenever I want that sometimes when new people come to my house that I'm not that comfortable, then I sometimes just fart and I'm like, oh wait, like that's not normal to do in normal society. And then you're like,
it's so funny.
Yeah, it makes you think about that. And then because you're like, oh, you're so comfortable in the online space. And I think this is why it's so beautiful for us to share, like being seen and seeing others online is actually one of the most safest places you can ever be. It can be more safe than your home, than the city you live in your current friend group. You find other people like by allowing yourself to be seen or allowing others to see you. And then you find these like magical communities where you could just like fart in front of whenever you want to and just like be your true self.
Or like physical farting. Yeah.
Oh, that's the term, verbal farting. Yes.
I love it. And it's true, like you probably find that in your communities. I find it in my communities when I have like first meetings with a group, and then whoever is talking, you literally hear everyone else like, same, same, same. Oh my God, literally the exact same thing I've been going. This is the exact, I really resonate with that, right? It's like you could probably, it would be very hard for you to meet physically such an aligned group of people like you can sometimes virtually from all over the world. Right? I'm in Lithuania.
Yes.
I mean, hello, right? Like this is magical. I feel like we're rewriting a lot of the stigma, a lot of bad rep that I think online space has been getting. I think if you do it right, if you are intentional, there's definitely a lot of healing.
Yes. And like in my groups, when people are sharing or presenting or being on camera, right? Like it feels so good because they're like, oh, I didn't know like being on camera or doing videos could feel good. And like you said, we need to create safety. It feels so safe to be in environments to practice where you're like, oh, I like these people. I want to be seen. And I feel like I understand them. And it's like that act alone is so healing. And I believe we need to have these places that are become like new family, where you allow them to, just like our ancestors or just like our family, they can be like our pillars, our foundation, like some pillar within inside ourselves that's so strong. And you can enter the world and you're not rolling one deep. You're rolling like 10 deep. You're like, it's not just me.
Yeah.
I have all these other people and all these support to feel like I'm not alone in this world and what I'm doing. And in this courageous moment, I'm not alone. And I think that that's like kind of absolutely necessary when we talk about like a lot of the pain around being seen comes from the family or from the childhood.
Mm-hmm.
To heal that is to find more community that is supportive and the kind of the opposite of the fear that you had, which is like feeling safe to be seen, feeling safe to be revered, feeling safe to be in the spotlight. And you're kind of rewriting or rejiggering that part of your body and your mind that says it's unsafe to feeling safe. And then you start to like enter spaces from that strength.
Yeah, from that new experience, new reference point. Yeah, because like we break and we get hurt in connection and we heal in connection.
Yeah.
Right. So we need that to heal. Shall we wrap up here? Shall we stop here?
Yeah. Oh, so many things, so many beautiful things, and so many understandings of myself, right? Like, like, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, that's what I'm going through. And so yeah, thank you for letting us have that space to do that.
Thank you for taking the time to explore a holistic approach to career change. If you've been struggling to identify a new aligned career path, or you don't know how to transition into your new professional chapter, and you feel like you need some guidance on transition strategies, make sure you go to the show notes and check out the support available for you. There are 2 ways in which you can work with me. One-on-one, where I will be personally guiding you to a new purpose-led career or business, or you can join the Holistic Career Change group program, where together with your soul sisters, you will not only have a proven step-by-step process to transition, but also a like-minded community going through career change alongside you. All the links and information below. Have a wonderful week.